Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Great show. We have Mike Bara back on the show talking about his new book, Ancient Aliens on the Moon. Very excited. Cool book. Lots of data, which we like on this show. But don't forget, this hour of Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, psychic readings, and energy healing. So if there's something going on in your work life, personal life, or health, give me a call and we can set up a time for a private consultation. And don't forget, my new book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, is now available on Amazon.com, or you can purchase it directly from us, which is autographed, from our main website, which is www.soulhealer.com. And please do go to the Just Energy Radio webpage and sign up for our weekly newsletter, where you'll be kept informed of all of our upcoming guests, like Mike, who we have on today. I'm just trying to think if there's any other little announcements I need to make. Not that I can think of. So let me tell you a little bit about Mike and get him on the air. Mike Bara is a New York Times bestselling author, screenwriter, and lecturer. A self-described born-again conspiracy theorist, Mike's first book, Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA, co-authored with the venerable Richard Hoagland, was a New York Times bestseller in 2007. Mike has made numerous public appearances lecturing on the subject of space, science, NASA, physics, and the link between science and spirit. So the author of the book, Ancient Aliens on the Moon, Mike Bara. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey, Rita, I am great today. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. I think it's really interesting.
You're not supposed to ask the whole question. Sorry about that.
I think it's really interesting. The last time you were on the show, and I remember this so clearly, we had touched on and really did not even talk about the whole concept of what was going on the moon and the possibility of ancient, bases being there. And our basic conversation in the show was, that's a huge topic. Maybe we should do another show about it. And then, boom, the new book. Congratulations. I guess there was that much information that it really did warrant a whole separate show on it.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things where the more you dig into pictures of the moon, the more bizarre, strange, unfamiliar, artificial stuff you see everywhere. And actually, I shouldn't use the word unfamiliar. That's not fair. It's very familiar. It looks very human in the architecture. But the more you look at the moon, the stranger a place it becomes, and the more obvious it is that somebody has Richard, my colleague Richard likes to say, cared enough to leave the very best, whoever they were, because there are ruins all over the moon. There are bases on the moon. There are vast remnants of this once great civilization on the moon, and it's just all you got to do is start looking at the pictures, or even look through a telescope these days, and you can see this stuff. And it's pretty freaky, but it certainly warranted, I thought, a new book, and that's where Ancient Aliens on the Moon came from.
And it was a good read and filled with data and millions of pictures, which I really appreciated. One of the things that I've always heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but finding pictures is just challenging, and that a number of the pictures that you find on the internet or in other sources have been doctored, and so these anomalies are often, photoshopped out or colored over, or the original documents are just they're lost somehow.
Well, that's true. And, by the way, I wanted to let everybody who's listening know that if you go to my blog page, it's Mike Bara with one R, Mikebara, but mikebara.blogspot.com, and you go to the Photos tab, there's a link right there to a Picasso web album where I have in full resolution all of the pictures that are in the book, Ancient Aliens on the Moon, along with the captions, I believe. And I did that because, there's just a loss of fidelity from the digital to the print format. You can't translate it into a print book that successfully. So if you like the pictures that were in the book, I suggest you go to my web album and look at the pictures on the web or on your computer screen, because they'll be even more impressive there. And what you said is absolutely true. The big problem, and there's a prime example of this in the second to last chapter of the book, I think the chapter 8 or 9. There is the case of a very strange object on the moon that kind of created a lot of controversy a while back that I'm calling the dataless zigurat, which is an object that looks like a pyramidal structure on the moon. And NASA did go to the trouble of wiping it out of several photographs, but they also missed a couple of other pictures that apparently they didn't realize, today they didn't realize there were other photographs of this thing. They missed a couple other photos of it. And they also missed a whole bunch of other stuff that's all over that picture. There are vehicles, tracked vehicles. There's what looks like a beach house in Malibu or something up on a hillside. There's what appears to be some kind of temple with sort of Stonehenge-like formations around it. And there is a huge bunker cut into the side of a mountain with what, for all intents and purposes, certainly appears to be a flying saucer sitting there, complete with landing gear and everything. And you look at this and you say to yourself, wow, they got the one big thing in the middle of the picture, but they kind of didn't notice and look around the rest of it. So the thing is, there's been attempts to sort of whitewash the record, and there's been a lot of different stories that we've heard over the years from people that worked at NASA about these kinds of things that have gone on inside of NASA, where they kind of wipe things off of the photographs. But there's so many pictures of the moon. There's so many different things on the moon. There's so much to do that I think in some cases it's like the job, it's too big a job, and they kind of figured, I think, nobody was really looking. So in a lot of cases, a lot of things slip through the cracks, and it's those artifacts, ruins, and structures that have slipped through the cracks that we're now looking at. And, good gosh, I would love to get my hands on the original prints and negatives, if they even exist, because they always tell a different story than the digital record that's out there now. So I do have to say that, the premise you came up early with the question is pretty much correct, that I don't trust a lot of what's on the internet, but I will always take an analog print, an early generation from the 1960s print, first generation print, over anything scanned from any negative that's in the NASA database online right now, because that's always the better source. And unfortunately, we don't have access to every single picture. I really wish we did, because there's just a wealth of astonishing stuff everywhere all over the place.
I remember seeing that picture of that ziggurat structure, and that was pretty impressive, because it did look like there was a pyramid and with like a retaining wall going around it, which was extremely reminiscent to sites that you see in Sumeria.
Yeah, and that's why I named it a ziggurat. That's why it caught my eye. And, that picture itself, there's a version of it that's in the book, and it's there's a big discussion of it. I think I put about 20,000 words of extra stuff. It's kind of a follow-up. It didn't get into the book because of my publishing deadline. Back and forth with a guy who's one of the bunker types funded by NASA, about the image. And the conclusion that I came to is that particular picture was probably from a first-generation print that was stored, I think, in a photo album under somebody's staircase for 30 or 40 years until somebody, maybe a nephew or something, went through Uncle Joe's NASA pictures that he got when he worked at NASA back in the 60s and said, holy crap, there's a pyramid here. And he scanned it and put it on the web. And so we have that, and it just does not match up with the NASA database that's out there right now. But what's really interesting is that the picture, the NASA picture that is online, the pyramid itself looks different. And although I can see most of the features there, you can't see all of them that are in this original image. And it's pretty obvious that somebody has basically taken a paintbrush tool, a Photoshop type paintbrush tool, set it to pitch black, and then just promptly drew in fake shadows over a lot of those features. And that's been a source of controversy, but I really have a lot of faith that the original image is from an original first-generation print. And to me, that's always a better source. It's always a better source than anything digital online, especially with NASA puts a stamp on, because after so many different incidents that, Richard and I talked about in Dark Mission, and then I've talked about again in Ancient Aliens on the Moon, after so many incidents of them altering data, I just cannot trust NASA anymore.
Well, I just think it's interesting that you found one picture when you hold it up to the same quote-unquote image, they're not the same, which even provides more evidence that they're trying to hide something, because it's kind of like, ooh, busted.
Yeah, well, the thing is, though, it's kind of like, look, I'm about, this close to calling shenanigans on this election that happened on Tuesday, but the point is that unless somebody who's perceived as an authority figure, in other words, some major person in the media, is willing to speak out about something, it never gets any traction. It doesn't matter how many times NASA lies. It doesn't matter how many times you catch them. And Richard and I have certainly caught them an almost infinite number of times, lying, misleading, distorting the facts on issues, modifying data. It doesn't matter how many times you catch them. If somebody, who's an authority figure doesn't back you up, then it never becomes an embedded reality. It's just your own truth that you can stand in. And you have to sort of do that. You have to just kind of do that on your own and just say, look, the people that are willing to listen to are my audience, and just realize that you're never going to get a breakthrough in the general public's mind. They're just not going to accept it. There's people that just don't want to accept certain things that make them uncomfortable. And I'm sorry, but the fact that NASA would lie about something is just an idea that makes too many people uncomfortable to ever be truly accepted.
Well, and if there are actually bases on the moon, and we're going to obviously talk more about that, in your evidence, but if there are bases on the moon, I mean, that's a huge cover-up. But then again, that they cover everything.
Again, yeah, they cover all kinds of things up. I mean, again, not to I'm just kind of making a comparison with the election last Tuesday, but, if you believe that it was a legitimate election, then you have to believe that fewer Mormons voted for a Mormon named Mitt Romney than voted for John McCain, because that's what they're trying to tell us the truth is from last Tuesday. And there's just no way. But, again, I'm kind of in a situation that's reached a point now, in this 2012 environment that we're in, where everybody's becoming polarized and we're sort of taking sides on issues. And, you got to kind of decide what the truth is and what side you're going to be on. And you can't really worry about what other people think anymore, because you're just not going to convince enough of them without, some sort of authority figure stamping his approval on it. And we're kind of just in a situation where there's I feel like a real cultural separation happening between people that are of different political persuasions and people that are of different reality persuasions, I guess is how I put it. And this is part of that, and basically I wrote Ancient Aliens on the Moon. I wrote it for the generation of young people who've never heard of Richard C. Hoagland. They've never heard of Coast to Coast AM, Art Bell, the old way of getting things out into them. The X-Files is ancient history. So there's a whole new generation that's never heard of this stuff, and we kind of have to I'm just trying to get people to appreciate that, we're not alone, and not only is there Ancient Aliens ruins left on the Earth, but there's a ton of stuff out in the solar system also.
And let's talk about, I want to say dating, but actually I want to start even before that, because one of the things you talk about in the book is the moon in general. What the moon is, how was it formed. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I had wanted to ask you in the last interview, and I'm just going to kind of throw it all into this one pile, was the theory that it was actually towed into place. And so I'm just handing it to you. So what do you think the moon is? How do you think it came into being and put into the, where it is now?
Well, and in the course of doing the research, what I came to decide about it is that it is a natural satellite, was originally a natural satellite of the Earth, that in my opinion was fissioned off from the Earth, spun off from the Earth, in essence. And it has then since been radically modified and by people, whoever they were, aliens, the previously highly advanced human civilization, but they've come to the moon, they've made major modifications to it, and may have even moved it a little bit to sort of create a physical environment on the Earth that was very amenable to higher forms of life, like the human race. So, again, we talked about that in The Choice. If you go back to my previous book, The Choice, that's a subject for under discussion. But what I really found was that basically the moon is, at this point, made up of the same stuff as the Earth. And what that means is that it came from the Earth in some sense when it was originally formed. So the idea that it's completely artificial and aliens coded into the orbit that it's in, eons ago, I don't think really holds up, because when you look at the composition of it, some of the recent tests that have been done on titanium oxygen isotopes, basically it's made of the same stuff as the Earth, and not only that, it's made of the upper crust stuff, the light mantle material of the Earth, for the most part. So that's really important, an important piece of information. But ultimately, it doesn't matter where it came from. It's what's there that I think is important, and what we have to get focused on, bringing out to people the reality of who we are and where we came from.
And you're talking about this group of people, creating these structures on the moon. Do you have any, and I'm open to complete speculation here on your part, any idea, dating-wise, when this civilization might have been on the surface of the moon?
That's the hardest thing to do, is to say when this all happened. Now, it's really interesting because in The Choice, in my second book, I wrote about the Hopi prophecies and the Hopi belief systems, which talk about the idea that there have been 3 previous worlds of man, and that at least one of them was extremely advanced technologically. In fact, it was more advanced than even we are today. So, that's a fascinating concept, and you start to look at some of the architecture that's on it. And to tell you the truth, it looks human. It does not look like an alien intelligence that designed it. It looks like the same kind of stuff we would build. There are ziggurats, temples, pyramids, some of the objects, some of the structures. There's these glass towering kind of structures that are over vast parts of the moon that we haven't talked about yet. And those appear to be, they follow human design rules. They follow kind of the way we think. And so I think to myself, well, I wonder, how much of this that we're looking at is not really extraterrestrial in any sense that of the word. In other words, from people that are truly outside the solar system, came from somewhere else, but they're actually, a previous version of the human race that built this stuff. And if that's the case, then, we could be looking at things that are only on the order of a few thousands of years old, or even maybe 100,000 years old, or 26,000 years old. But some of it could go back millions and millions of years. And the interesting thing about the moon, of course, is that it's a pretty rough place, so you have a lot of degradation. There's all these meteors striking the moon constantly. You've got the radiation environment of space without any atmosphere to protect it. So putting my finger on it, I don't know. What I will say is this, though, that there do appear to be multiple epochs of this stuff. There are very, very old ruins and then there are newer, fresher ones. So it looks like somebody was here a long time ago, then somebody else came along, somebody else came along. All I know is that the current version of history that Neil Armstrong was the first man to set foot on the moon, I don't think is correct.
Well said. Did you find, because I'm thinking about the earlier work and, the whole idea of the face on Mars and the pyramids in Sedona, here we're talking about a ziggurat. Do you think there was any relationship between what you're finding on the moon and what has been found on Mars as well? Could it have been the same culture that was actually inhabiting both planets?
Oh, yeah, I think that there's definitely a connection between the two. I mean, you look at the architecture, you look at the ziggurat, and it's definitely human-esque architecture. And then you look at Sidonia and Mars, you look at the ancient aliens on Mars, and there's what appears to be at least a half human face monument carved on the surface of Mars. And there's these vast pyramids, and then there's an underground city which has been seen in infrared images. So basically what you're looking at is, you're looking at a related culture. And some of it may be Zechariah Sitchin's Anunnaki, the guys who came from this planet Nibiru, which is on this weird 3,600-year orbit around the sun, and they pass through here every 3,000 years or so, 3,500 years or so. And some of it may be, really, truly extraterrestrials from a far distant place that came and were doing something here, maybe playing around with the genetics of the planet, or playing around with the different life forms. Because as you look at the fossil record of the human race, and there's a great book out by Lloyd Pye. I don't know if you've ever had Lloyd on your show, but he's a great guest. He wrote a book called Everything You Know Is Wrong, Book 1, Human Origin. And the way he talks about the fossil record is that what it really shows is that species just seem to spring into existence fully formed, and last about 1 million years and then they become extinct. That's the history of the fossil record of the planet Earth. And what that implies is something he calls the cosmic dump truck theory, which is that somebody's flying past, they look at the Earth and they go, oh, this is a great place for some life, and they just basically dump a bunch of life into the ocean and then sit back and see what happens. And, under that theory, then you might have this very different, you might have had humanoid civilizations on different planets all the way through the solar system. And again, in the choice, that's one of the things I talk about, is the idea that there were once 3 very lush, wet, warm, habitable planets in the solar system, Venus, Earth, and Mars. And Mars, in fact, under that theory. And when I get into my next book, which is going to be Ancient Aliens on Mars, by the way, I'm going to talk about this. Mars, Mars was not really a planet. It's a moon of another planet, a super Earth, as the scientists are now calling them, that doesn't exist anymore. But at one time, all 3 of these worlds were warm and lush and wet and habitable. And, you had an outer Earth in Mars, you had an inner Earth in Venus, and you had the middle Earth, which is this one that's left. And, so I'm just fascinated by the real history of the solar system and who built this stuff and where it came from. But I absolutely think that some of these cultures were definitely connected. I mean, whoever was on Mars logically would be the same people who were on the moon. And whoever was on the moon wasn't there just for, it's not a resort. It's not really the kind of place you go for a vacation. So whatever they were doing on the moon, they were definitely involved with something to do with life here on Earth, or mining, or any number of possibilities.
Well, I think your little analogy of, the 3 planets, but you made a statement that just kind of struck me. Earth was in the middle, and mythology often talks about, Middle Earth, that this was Middle Earth, and they would travel from, Asgard to Midgard, and then from here to Hell, using their rainbow bridge, which I think is, some kind of teleporting system, or,
right.
Wormhole technology. So I don't know. It just kind of struck me, and it might have been, back in the day, a long, long time ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that those mythological stories are the truth. that they are basically a form of the truth, and that if you look at Mars, what I think happened, and this is just speculation at this point, but I'm going to try to go into it, in the next book fairly deeply. What I think is that the most advanced civilization was on Mars, and they were wiped out in some kind of conflict that had something to do with the destruction of that planet. And the truth is now we're the only ones left, and so we kind of have a big job to take care of our planet and take care of our civilization, because there's not a lot left here after whatever happened. Because whatever happened to Venus and whatever happened to Mars was a really, really bad hair day for everybody. It was really a rough time.
So you're thinking that what happened to them wasn't natural in nature, but there was, I like to say, the hand of God involved, possibly. I mean, and that's like a quote-unquote alien God, not God.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to me, there's always, and I talk about this in The Choice, in my second book, there's God with a big G, which is this big, all-knowing, all-loving force that we all feel around us and that we're connected to, and then there's the gods with a small G, who were just basically guys with technology that basically came here and did some stuff and may have even, manipulated our genetics to some extent. But those things are not the same thing. Even if you look at the Bible, there's Elohim, and then there's Yahweh Elohim. And Yahweh Elohim, basically, if you read the Bible, is just a guy. And people confuse this. They think that when the Bible talks about Yahweh, that they're talking about the big God. And they're not. Yahweh just seems to be some dude who was left behind on Earth to sort of, manage the population for a while. So it's really interesting as you dig into the true meaning of a lot of these older books in the Bible and some of the Sumerian tales, and the Norse mythology that you just referred to. It all kind of tells the same story, but with slightly different, poetic license, I guess I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think they offer little pieces, and figuring out which is the true piece is a little bit challenging, but I think they create a richer and fuller narrative, when you start looking at them side by side. So, okay, so I'm going to change the topic here real quick. So I'm just going to put out, and I mean, I think this is pretty well understood already, that, intelligent life at one point in time lived on the moon. But from that position, when was it first theorized or even suspected that the moon was not just this lifeless rock?
When did we first suspect that?
Mm-hmm.
I think we kind of knew before we ever went to the moon that the moon itself was definitely, a place where we were going to find some really, really interesting stuff. So the way that I kind of come to that conclusion is in the book I talk about this thing called the Brookings report. And the Brookings report is very, very interesting study that was commissioned by NASA at the very dawn of the space age. And essentially what it told them was that the odds are that you're not going to meet ET face-to-face, but you could come across some evidence, ruins or artifacts, as they call it, that would prove that ET had been, through these parts before. And if you do, you should seriously consider the possibility of not telling anybody, because if you tell people, it could cause our culture to collapse and make everybody crazy. So, the fact that this document even exists and that it was commissioned by NASA, as I look at it, it was political cover. I think that the insiders pretty much already knew, probably from their study of these ancient religions, that we were going to find stuff out there on the moon, and they just wanted to, basically make sure that they had political and legal cover in case they ever got caught at that cover-up. So I think from the beginning of the space program, we pretty much had a good idea what we were going to find when we went there.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you could actually see some of these and I'm just going to call them anomalies just to cluster them all. Mm-hmm. These anomalies with a telescope?
Yeah, there actually are people now who are using, 16-inch telescopes that are very successfully, finding stuff that looks clearly artificial just through a telescope. And that's one of these things. That's one of the things that we would, I would definitely like to, get a study together and try to get people to focus on certain areas of the moon and take stereoscopic imagery and so forth, and get it out to the public, because that's something that we can all do. So technology's gotten so good now. But yeah, we can basically look at the moon through a telescope and we can find evidence of artificial structures, which is not something we could have done 30, 40, 50 years ago.
But couldn't the government and NASA and the, astrophysicists that have the giant telescopes, didn't they have the technology to look that close at the moon? I mean, I would think so.
Well, they did, but not really. I mean, what we have now is we have these laptops that can now basically take a telescope, synchronize it, turn it, and basically show the Earth, show the moon through the scope, basically motionless. You can follow the moon as it tracks across the sky. Remember, everything's constantly in motion, so you can actually get clearer images today with the really high quality optics and the fact that the telescopes can now be set up to track on a laptop the movement of the moon and get really, really good images of this stuff. So it's not quite the same. And even then, I'm sure there are telescopic images of the moon that NASA has from back in the days that are just as good as some of the stuff we're seeing today.
But they're secret, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, I would assume so.
But then, I know that before they sent the Apollo missions to the moon, they had sent some probes to take pictures, and then there were the early Apollo missions that went and were taking imagery from the moon. Did they find stuff in those really early missions as well? Or have you uncovered things from photos from those early missions?
Well, yeah, they found stuff, right away. One of the first missions that went to the moon that actually, there were some very early lunar orbiter missions, but one of the first really, really strange things that happened that I talk about in the book is the mission of Surveyor 1. Now, when we decided we're going to go to the moon, we basically had three sets of unmanned probe. There was the Ranger series, which was designed to figure out how to navigate to the moon and how to get to a specific spot on the moon and land there effectively. And then there was Lunar Orbiter, which was sent to take reconnaissance photographs of areas that we might consider landing. And the most popular area very early on was a region called Sinus Medii, which is called the sea in the middle. And it was just an area where they thought, well, it's right smack in the middle of the lunar disk. We'd probably have the best communications. It'd be a great place to land. And so they started taking pictures of this area very, very extensively. And then the next step was to actually land a probe on the surface of the moon and take pictures from the surface just to make sure that the surface was solid, because there was a fairly extensive debate about whether the regolith, the dust, was so deep that a spacecraft might just sink into it 10 feet or more and, never be heard from again. And that was something they were obviously concerned about. So they created the Surveyor series of probes, which were supposed to land on its surface and transmit back pictures. Now, they had a fairly exotic television camera system on those. It was exotic for the time. Surveyor 1 was the first spacecraft, American-made spacecraft, to actually land on the moon as opposed to just crashing into it. And when it landed, they took some pictures with their television system. And they took 3 frames, one with a red filter, one with a green filter, and one with a blue filter. And the idea was you take these 3 pictures, you stack them on top of each other, and you'll have a red, green, blue color image of the surface of the moon. What they expected was they would get very, very bland, gray, uninteresting pictures of the surface of the moon, just like we've all been trained to believe that it actually looks. What they got back instead was yellow, green, blue, purple, pink, red. They got this bizarre, multicolored picture of the surface of the moon. And after that, they kind of stopped taking color pictures of the surface after that. So it was really, really a strange, really strange mystery at the time as to what had caused that. And I think right from that moment forward, people inside NASA knew that we were in for a very, very interesting ride outside.
But see, even that seems so bizarre. I mean, who cares if there is color on the moon? I mean, that just seems like such a trivial point to want to cover up. I mean, what would the implication be of having red stones or pink stones there?
Well, the reason why the colors were like this is because of what was overhead. And this is what I discussed, I think, in Chapter 4 of the book, in Ancient Aliens on the Moon. What would cause this multicolored surface of the moon? The rocks and stuff really aren't that color. What you're getting is you're getting color from above, as if you were showering the moon with colored light. Like remember back in the 60s and 70s, you had kind of this psychedelic effect that was really popular with different colored cells, and even rock bands still use these. They use lights with a red cellophane cell over the top of it, or a blue one or a green one. But so what is causing all these multiple colors is the fact that there is these towering artificial glass structures at various parts of the surface of the moon, especially in the Sinus Medii area. That's one of the areas that's most reliably obvious that these things exist. And so what you have is this multi-layered glass structure on, literally stretching miles above the lunar surface. And when that happens, what happens with light is that as light hits these, it passes through these panes of glass as if it was passing through a prism. And when light is bent and slowed down and begins to interact, what will happen is your standard red, green, blue start to mix together and become pink and purple and yellow and chartreuse and these very strange colors. So the explanation for why the surface looked like that could only be that overhead there was sort of this vast, extensive network of ancient artificial glass ruins on the surface of the moon, and that is something that they really, really couldn't go, that is a direction they definitely could not and would not want to go. They would not want to discuss that. So quite obviously, that would be the reason why you would want to just pretend like the surface colors of the moon were nothing but the really boring, standard, gray that we've all been taught to believe the moon, that's how it really looks.
I'm going to jump back to Mars because I just saw a show on TV. It was, I think, Carrie Cassidy and somebody else talking about Mars, and they were talking about, Mars has a blue sky, and the rock isn't really red. It's got multiple colors in it, kind of like what you're saying with the moon, and the images have all been, they've changed the filter on it, or they put a filter on it so everything looks red.
Right.
So did you agree with that we also have these images being doctored that are coming from Mars because of the same reason?
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that that program. It's quite awful, I thought, but it was, Richard Hoagland was in, and then that's exactly what the truth is. That in fact did happen. Everybody saw the blue sky when it first came out, and then the official NASA position became that Mars, in fact, has a red kind of technicolor red sky. And this is one of the things that will be in my next book. It'll be in Ancient Aliens on Mars. Is the whole debate about what color is the sky on Mars. Well, it's blue, and it almost has to be blue because of a phenomenon called Rayleigh scattering. And what that basically means is that sunlight is going to hit the molecules of an atmosphere in a certain way, and it's always going to scatter light into the blue end of the spectrum. So the sky on most planets is, for the most part, going to be blue. That's the simplest way I can say to describe it. So there's kind of no way around it. And what they clearly wanted at NASA was they clearly wanted people to believe that the sky on Mars is red and that the ground is very, very red, where in fact it's not. And what Hoagland and I did, and what I'm going to be doing more of in the next book, is to basically you just take some pictures, and they actually have color wheels on some of the early Martian probes, on Viking and on Pathfinder, the ones that landed on the surface. And all you have to do is basically just make the white look white, and when you do, the sky turns blue, and the ground is kind of this brown, boring sort of Arizona-type landscape. But I think that the agenda there was that NASA really doesn't want you to, they want you to think Mars is really weird and really different, so you don't get too comfortable with the idea of going there or that people could live there. Because if people could have lived there, then the idea that there could have been an advanced civilization on the planet, as we're seeing in the pictures, becomes more viable. So what they want to do is they want to make these places look as alien and foreboding as they can, because they want to make sure that we don't start to believe that they are potentially habitable, or were once habitable before they're ready to tell us that. I don't think they're ready to tell us that yet.
And I'm just going to tangent here a second, but what about the people that say there are current bases on the moon and current bases on Mars, and that people go to them all the time?
They say that. None of them have any evidence.
I'm just reporting it.
But they say that. You saw the guy on the show, Andrew DeSaggio or whatever his name is, who's been around and claiming he teleported to Mars. Well, okay, great. I'll believe it when I step into the teleporter and go to Mars myself. There's no evidence of it. So it certainly is viable. It's a possibility. It's not something that I can deal with, though, in a book like Ancient Aliens on the Moon. All I can deal with is what I can see in the pictures. And what I can see in the pictures appears to be ruined, abandoned, ancient stuff. And by ancient, it's at least, in the thousands of years old. It's certainly not recent. I've never found anything in any of the moon pictures that indicates to me that we're looking at an active base in any of these photos. We're looking at stuff that's been abandoned for a long time. And, it's still our legacy. It's still our history. But it's certainly much richer than we've been led to believe by, our school books and by people at NASA. But it is not, as far as I can tell, currently active. If I had evidence of that, I would go for it. But I just don't. Even the flying saucer in a bunker that I talked about, looks like it's been there a long time, and there's a lot of debris and stuff in this, in the bunker itself around the base of the flying saucer. So wherever the legs are that are holding this thing up, they certainly look to be, looks like it's been abandoned for a long time.
So you've talked a few times about these structures that are there, and I know that in the book you talk about a number of different ones. We talked about the ziggurat kind of thing, but what other kind of structures are there?
Well, you have this sort of very large scaffolding sort of stuff that seems to be, if you enhance or overexpose images of the background sky, which should be in all these photographs absolute black, what you end up seeing is these very large, interconnected, scaffolding type of semi-transparent or transparent structures. And the current theory that Hoagland has, and that I agree with, is that this is probably made of lunar glass, because lunar glass would be the ideal thing from which to construct a meteor shield. So the reason for that is that glass is actually about twice as strong as steel if there's no moisture in the glass itself, and there is no moisture on the moon to speak of. So you would be able to, it's kind of the ideal stuff to make a meteor shield out of. So you've got these very, very large, towering glass structures, which have, there's box-like stuff there. There's wires connecting things. You see large objects sort of hanging off of this scaffolding type of structure over Spinus Medi, over Mare Crisium, over many, many major feature areas on the surface of the moon. So you've got this one level of stuff. And then below that, I think in chapter 8, I go over the evidence for there being really, truly, glass domes. In other words, the kind of a watch crystal type dome that would be over the surface of a crater. There's a couple craters in Mare Crisium named Cleomedes F and Cleomedes FA, which from a side angle, there's a shot where there are clearly transparent domes, like you have on a watch crystal, covering these craters. And even the crater Picard appears to have some remnants of a shattered dome type structure. So there's kind of two different sorts of domes there. And then there's all sorts of other bizarre architecture. There is an area around the rim of the crater Copernicus where you can see bridges and roads and machinery and what looks like drilling equipment and power plants and these box-like structures. And there's these huge, I call them generators, I don't know what they are, but they're these huge rounded objects that look like half-buried tires or something. It really looks almost like the rebel base from the film The Empire Strikes Back, buried in the ground. And then you have individual stuff. You have pyramids, you have ziggurats, you have abandoned equipment. You just have all kinds of stuff. I mean, anything under the sun you can imagine, if you look, it's there. So it's really a whole different set of structures. You've got the towering glass stuff, you've got the individual domes over craters, and then you have basically just the ruins and the equipment. And there's even places on the surface of the moon where it looks like the surface has pulled apart, it's been ripped apart, and when you look in the shadows, you'll see angular crisscrossing beams and girders and stuff that's clearly not natural underneath the surface, as if the surface itself was sort of a almost artificial or pretend surface, like it's all fake, and then you have the structure. So it's possible that the natural moon itself is a little bit smaller, than the moon that we see, that the surface that we see is maybe all just kind of a fake pretend surface. It's really bizarre to look at, but there's basically every kind of different structure you can imagine in different places on the Earth.
All right, so you talked about the scaffolding, and I'm glad you're where you are and I'm where I am so that you can't come attack me here. But, I had Jay Widener on the show, and, I know you know his theory, and I would just like to hear what you have to say with relationship to that. I mean, I have some comments that I'm going to make, but I would just like to hear what you have to say, and
I've tried to dance around this as much as I can, but I think
just lay it out there. We're good with it.
Yeah, I think Jay's an idiot. I don't know what he's talking about. He thinks that Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing. Okay, that is whack. I'm sorry, it's just plain whack. And what you have is images from orbital spacecraft. You have the unmanned probes. You have images from Russian probes. You have images from the Apollo astronauts themselves that held the cameras out the window of the spacecraft and took photographs. And you have photographs taken by the astronauts on the surface of the moon that all show this stuff. They all show the same stuff. In fact, one of the things that I show, I think in Chapter 4 of Ancient Aliens on the Moon, is I do a comparison between the two landing sites. There were two Apollo landing sites, 12 and 14, that were only about 120 miles apart. And you can actually see there's these large, broad, angled structures. And you could actually see the same structure over the horizon, in the background, extending miles high into the sky above both landing sites, taken with two completely different photographic mediums, one on 16-millimeter film and one with a 70-millimeter Hasselblad camera set to infinity. So, again, Jay's got his own opinions, he has his own business, he has books and videos to sell, so do I. I believe he sincerely believes that, but I've kind of reached the point, where I just don't respond to it anymore because I just think it's silly. Jay, according to Jay, also the sun is supposed to be going crazy right now, doing out solar flares and burning us all to death within the next, month or so. December 21st, they're all going to die. And none of that's happened either. So, that's all I have to say about it. Jay and Richard have had their disagreements over the years, and there's a lot of bad blood. That's all I have to say about it.
Okay, that's why I was kind of like, I'm glad I'm here and you're there, because I knew it would kind of flare things. But and let me just kind of tell you my position. We had Jay on, and it on the surface, it's pretty compelling. Just watching his video, I thought it was pretty interesting. That was my thought. But then I read your book, and not to diss Jay at all, I didn't realize that, a number of the images that you were showing these structures on came from orbital probes or from, places that weren't just from the Apollo landings. Because if it was from the Apollo landings, maybe there was some credence, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. And so it kind of changed, it changes the story again.
Again, I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to argue about this, but I've kind of reached the end of my line with Jay.
Okay.
I've gone back and forth with him. I've tried to work with him on projects before. It hasn't worked out. It's just one of these things where I just don't listen to what he says anymore because I think sometimes he's just so far off the wall that I don't even, I can't even argue with him. It's just he doesn't seem to understand anything about photography in a lunar vacuum. And he doesn't, his case just doesn't hold up. I'd be fascinated by it because I think Stanley Kubrick, for one, knew a lot of stuff, and he was trying to tell us things in his films. In fact, 2001: A Space Odyssey is about the Brookings report. It was all inspired by the Brookings report that we talked about earlier. And I can go with him on the symbolic stuff, the symbolism, and a lot of those things. But this idea that this is all fake, I just have never seen any evidence whatsoever that compels me to believe that any of these images are fake from the surface of the moon. I don't see that. The moon landings were not fake. We clearly went to the moon. And again, you can read his stuff and you can read my stuff and decide for yourself what you think the truth is. That's what it's all about. I don't want Jay to think I don't like him. I do. I've always liked him. But I just think sometimes he has his head firmly planted into an orifice at the back of his body. It's that way.
Well, I thought it would be kind of interesting to ask that question, but I didn't mean to touch a little nerve there, Mike. Sorry about that.
No, it's not that. It's not that. I just think, just you got to show me some evidence, and I just haven't seen the evidence that supports his theory. I haven't seen it.
Well, Mike, why don't we take a quick break right now, and when we come back, let's get a little bit more into some of these structures that we were talking about, and we won't talk about fake moon landings, okay?
Okay, that's fine with me.
Okie doke. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Mike Bara about his new book, Ancient Aliens on the Moon. His webpage is mikebara.blogspot.com, and we'll be back with Mike after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.